Okay, hello. This webinar is about a topic that I believe and think is extremely important for attorneys that are looking for jobs. And honestly, it's one of the most important topics there is because many people will end up having not as good a careers as they could because they tend to not look at as many markets as they should. And so this is really talks about a very important decision of deciding which markets to apply to and where to work. Throughout my career, I've noticed just some of the strangest things, like people trying to get jobs in one market, not having any luck, and then suddenly looking at different markets and having incredible luck. So that's what this is about. And the markets you choose to work in will really have a major impact on your search and your lifestyle, and your future really will be shaped by the markets you choose in your search. And so what this is about is talking about the rules that apply to markets, what happens to people based on the markets as they choose that I've seen. And here I'm going to talk about some of the more important rules about what I consider some of the most important rules about markets. And I'm also going to talk about something that's very important. So this webinar is actually about more than just markets. It's about questions that law firms are asking when they're hiring attorneys laterally and how you can benefit from these questions. And these questions are actually very simple. They're something that I cover in all of my webinars. And usually I'll cover them in the Q&As, but they really form the basis of any search. And when a law firm's deciding who to interview and hire, regardless of whether or not there's a job or not, they're always asking these questions. And the first one is, can you do the job? And what this means is, do you have the skills and experience to work in a law firm? Now, you may be asking yourself, why is this relevant to the market? And what happens is different law firms have different types of experience requirements depending on where they are, meaning the market that they're in, the sorts of clients they represent, and the various systems and rules they have for hiring attorneys. I'm going to go into a little more depth in this, but one thing you need to understand is law firms are typically going to have different types of clients that they represent in larger markets and smaller markets. Law firms in the largest markets may represent the largest clients, and law firms in smaller markets will tend to represent smaller clients. The BCG Attorney Search, we rank law firms and candidates on a ranking scale between 1 and 5. And this isn't a scale that is necessarily negative. So something that's ranked a 1 is not negative. It just really defines the type of clients that a law firm represents. And it also has a lot to do with the sorts of law firms that are likely to be interested in you and where they're likely to be interested in you. Law firms ranked a 5 are typically law firms that represent the largest clients and the most important matters that they face. And these firms are very difficult to get into. And being able to do the job in a 5 firm means you've been trained to work on the most sophisticated matters. You probably did the best in a good law school. And if you didn't go to the best law school, you're at the very top of your class. And they really require a very high level of accuracy and thought, meaning they can afford to look in depth at matters. The clients will pay whatever it takes to do the best job possible. And the cost really for a 5 firm is no object. They do not care. They will have, I've seen instances where a 5 firm will demand that 8th or 10th year attorney at that firm work on matters as trivial as discovery and document review, and because they want to have that very best job done, even though the billing rates are going to be higher. These law firms and their clients expect you to have incredible qualifications, meaning the very best. To get a job at a 5 firm, it's not enough to go to Harvard or something, or Stanford or Chicago. They want you to be someone that's at the top of your class at one of those schools. And they represent clients and they work on often the most important matters, and they're very specialized. So the larger the firm you work at and the higher the prestige level, the more prestige or the more the attorney is going to be very specialized. These clients are paying the highest bills rates imaginable. And because of that, they expect you to be able to figure out matters very quickly in a very discrete area of a practice area even. And they expect you to be very trained in a very narrow area of law. So what does that mean? What it means is that the most prestigious firms and these 5 firms, what they're looking for is not someone trained in capital markets or M&A, but someone that may do one aspect of that. And because of that, they're able to figure out what, for example, a healthcare company would need when doing that. And maybe a healthcare company that makes drugs and for a certain condition even. They expect you to be trained in a very narrow area of law. And again, M&A, healthcare, something like that. And it typically means you have the experience to get a job at one of these firms doing very similar work. And the 5 firm may very rarely hire attorneys from 4 firms if they're hiring laterally. And not only do they not hire laterally all the time, but they're most likely to hire from other 5 firms. If a firm like Paul Weiss, which I would say is probably a 5, is hiring people will come from Sullivan and Cromwell or firms like that, or similar type firms that would also be a 5. So these are some of the firms. You would take a Sullivan and Cromwell as a 5, a Paul Weiss is a 5, a Cravath is a 5, a Wachtel is a 5. And these types of firms rarely hire from 4 firms. And again, 5 firms are almost always in the larger market. So if you're asking, can you do the job, this kind of question, it typically means you're going to be working for a firm that's based in New York, most likely, or maybe Silicon Valley, or maybe LA, and even possibly Houston or something like that. But most of the firms are in New York, and then the Silicon Valley and Los Angeles. And these firms are almost always going to be located in areas that have lots and lots of attorneys with the best credentials. So an attorney that is at the top of their class at Columbia Law School is unlikely to go to work at a firm, and this isn't saying anything negative, a firm in Ohio or a firm in Memphis or something, or you get the idea, or Tallahassee, Florida. They're more likely to want to go to a big city, and I don't know what that says. These firms are most likely to be in big markets. So most of the attorneys that work at 5 firms, typically, when they're looking at other firms, they will try to get firms most of the time in their existing market, and they'll look at 5 firms in other markets. That's not to say they always go to 5 firms. As a matter of fact, a lot of them will go to 4 firms, but a 5 firm in New York, or 5 attorneys in New York often do things like move to 5 firms in Silicon Valley, or they'll move to smaller markets, typically 4 firms. All this about when you can move firms in other markets, it's really looking at what people mostly do. It's not saying what they always do, but what they mostly do. And so this is how it works for 5 attorneys. And 5 attorneys that are laid off will first almost always try to get jobs with other 5 firms and in their existing market. And those 5 firms are very difficult to move laterally to. And they're like this because they really prefer, in most cases, to hire from their summer associate programs. Because they're 5 firms, they have very unique cultures, very unique ways of training people. And their thoughts are often that if they hire someone from a 4 firm laterally, or they hire someone who's not from their summer associate program, that attorney may have picked up bad habits, or they may not necessarily be as good of an attorney because of the habits they picked up working on smaller matters. And they also don't want to undermine their existing firm. So most 5 attorneys, when they're moving markets, will often move. It's very common, by the way, for attorneys at 5 firms in New York to move to Silicon Valley. Less common for those attorneys in Silicon Valley to move to New York, but that's how it works. And typically a 5 firm in New York City, that's someone that's working at one of those may exhaust the firms in New York and then move to Houston or Palo Alto if they can't get a job in New York City. And as they get more senior and don't have business, it's going to become harder and harder for them to move to a 5 firm. So what happens is they start looking at smaller markets. So the idea of a 5 attorney, and we'll start going through all the different ranks because you may be ranked a 3 or 2 or 1 or 4. But the idea of what happens to the 5 attorneys, they will typically work in 5 firms as long as they can. And in some cases, they can work, depending on their practice area, in an associate type level for a good portion of their career, 15 or 20 years, and sometimes even longer. I've seen it. But for the most part, these attorneys are going to experience, when they get more senior, the most success looking at smaller markets, especially in practice areas like litigation, for example. And it's very difficult for most 5 attorneys, once they get to the point of having 7, 8 years of experience to get into other 5 firms. So then what they do is they try to move to 4 firms. And they will often try to move to 4 firms because of their training and stuff. They will often even try to move as partners. So I've moved associates from 5 firms to 4 firms as partners before. I've also moved them to 3 firms, but it's less common. So an attorney that's at a 5 firm will try to get a firm at kind of a job at a kind of your standard AmLaw 100, AmLaw 200 firms, typically the ones that are larger in the AmLaw 100, but they can also try to get jobs in 3 firms. And as they start looking at smaller and smaller markets, the more likely it is for them to be able to get a lateral position, especially if they're seniors. Or they've had a lot of moves and so forth, but most 5 attorneys don't, or they have a long period of unemployment. And the smaller the markets an attorney looks at, the better off they'll often be, and the more positions they'll likely get. So as I'll talk about later today, a lot of the attorneys that are at 5 firms and 4 firms and so forth, the way to get a job is typically to move down to firms that represent smaller clients. So if an attorney works at a 5 firm in Dallas, and there's a few in Dallas, and wishes to move to a 4 firm, they'll start their search in Dallas, and then they're more likely to have more luck in their search and receive more interviews if they look at places like San Antonio, Fort Worth, and Austin, which Austin is now a fairly large market, but historically it wasn't. And if they go outside of Texas, they're going to probably get more interviews and interest than they might in a place like Cleveland than they would Chicago. And they're likely to get more interest in Nashville than Detroit, because Nashville's a little bit smaller market, and especially if they were looking at 4 firms, which are even rare in a lot of the smaller markets. And so a 4 firm is typically a firm that has an excellent reputation and is highly regarded. Most AmLaw 100 and AmLaw 200 firms are 4 firms. Those firms, it just means pretty much that what they do is represent a lot of large clients, but the clients tend to be a little bit more rate sensitive than they would be in 5 firms. And most boutiques that are composed of top law school graduates representing top firm and large companies are 4 firms. They all pay high market salaries, meaning the type of salaries everyone's trying to make. They're desirable places to work, and they're really not as difficult to get positions at as 5 firms, but they're still very difficult to get jobs at. And the caliber of attorneys is a little bit different, meaning they hire very good people, they're very desirable places to work, but the qualifications of the people there aren't quite as good. And they're distinguishable, maybe if I looked at them, but they might not be distinguishable to everyone. They're distinguishable to the firms. And there are 4 firms at markets all over the country. There's even some in New Mexico, and there's some, and these are national firms that may open offices in other markets. And there are firms in Detroit. You have, I would say, Foley and Lardner, and there's all sorts of firms in Detroit that would do that. There's some in Sacramento, Idaho. I think in Idaho you have Perkins Coie, which would be a 4 firm, and a lot of the suburbs outside a major city. And these firms more often are likely to open in places where 5 firms are unlikely to do, because 5 firms simply wouldn't have clients that are large enough to justify opening an office in those. And most 4 firms also have offices in places like New York and Palo Alto and big markets, but also smaller markets as well. And they're also specialized. The clients are going to be very large clients. They may represent the largest clients, but those clients typically may not use them if they have bet the company type matters. And those clients are likely to pay more attention to bills than the clients of a 5 firm, meaning they're going to question them some more. If a 5 firm is doing the work, they're less likely to question the bills and more likely to pay them. And a 5 firm is, again, more likely to be able to be involved in bet the company matters. And an attorney that's searching for a 4 firm has a better chance of getting a position in their own market if they're currently at a 5 firm or a 4 firm. However, the same logic applies. So since there's so many attorneys at 4 firms, you can imagine with the AmLaw 200, 100 and 200, there's huge numbers of them. And not all AmLaw 100 and 200 firms are 4 firms, but because there's so many attorneys, in four firms, it's less difficult for four attorneys to get jobs there. And again, it's easier also, just like it is for a five-firm attorney, for a four-firm attorney to get a position in smaller markets than major markets. Major markets, it's important to understand, and you need to understand this as a attorney, as a law student, as a senior attorney, or whatever level you're at, that major markets are very difficult in many cases to get jobs at and get jobs in. And the reason is because they just have more people competing for the same jobs. So they can afford to be much more discriminating. And when I say much more discriminating, I mean that if you go in-house, that's a sign, for example, that you may not be interested in working in a law firm. If you do that for a couple of years and try to get a job in a big firm in New York, they're not going to be interested, or Palo Alto or other, because they can find people that never did that. If you're unemployed, they're not going to be as interested because they can find people that are unemployed and don't have questions about them. So the idea for you to understand is that if there are things in your background that you are worried about, meaning unemployment, different career decisions, maybe you're in a practice area that's not in demand because of economic or other conditions, then you're going to have a very hard time getting a job in a major market. And you really need to think about, can you move? Because if you choose to move markets, you're going to have far more success than someone who demands to be in a certain market. I see people all the time that are unable to get jobs in the largest markets that are for attorneys because of whatever reason, it doesn't matter. And then they start looking at all these other markets where they may not even have any attachment or connections, and they get lots of positions and they get lots of interest. It's very interesting because they get positions in very good firms. And it's the same thing when a four firm has an office in a smaller market. A four firm with an office in a smaller market often receives only a few applications. And the reason that it's difficult many times is the local applications it receives may not be as strong as the attorney's qualifications in their existing firm. And because there's often fewer attorneys in that market, they may actually know the attorney applying. So a lot of the applications may be rejected because they don't want to upset attorneys in a firm, and they see people every day. So they're in constant communication. Getting a position in a four firm in a smaller market is much easier than trying to get one in a larger one. If you're watching this, and I know a lot of people show up to these webinars that are from top firms, which I think is smart, but you need to understand that it's much easier to get a job in a smaller market than a larger one. And in some practice areas like corporate and different IP and real estate, if you're coming from a smaller market and you want to go to a larger one after a recession or after a few years, you can in most transactional practice areas. And of course, another option for four candidates is to move to a three firm from a four firm. A three firm is a little bit different. Most four attorneys have an easier time moving to three firms. Three firms tend to represent more mid-sized companies. They will do work that often is more day-to-day type work. They won't be as concerned about things like top law schools and they'll have attorneys from varied backgrounds. They may do some practice areas that the largest firms wouldn't get involved in, which, for example, could be employment counseling and employment defense and patent prosecution and other things that a lot of times the four firms don't do. During a recession, and again, this is very important, if you're at a four firm and you have a difficult time finding a position, you can often fairly easily move to a three firm, especially in another market. And if you're a four firm and you get senior, you can often, and it's very difficult in your market to get a position, you can often move to three firms even in your own market or other markets. And if a law firm is a four, that means it's a law firm that you have heard of and that everyone has heard of, and they're not going to have a lot of difficulty attracting interest in applications. They will pay very high salaries. They have very good names. They're places that the attorneys are proud to say they work. And because of all this, especially in the largest markets, these law firms have a very easy time attracting attorneys than firms that might be ranked at three, for example. And the high salaries and prestige give them a decided edge in attracting the best attorneys. So I want to just give you a little bit of understanding when you start talking about these rankings, because I realize that I've just dived in and I want you to understand. So the 5 firms, I think I explained that. I think I explained the 4 firms. And the 3 firms are also firms that represent businesses, but they may occasionally represent individuals that don't necessarily have the deepest pockets. The 3 firms the businesses may not be as large. They could be local companies. Most markets above maybe 100,000 people will have, or even 50,000 will have some 3 firms in them. And so they're not bad firms, but they may not have multiple offices. There's just a bunch of things about them. And then when you start getting into 2 firms, you start getting into firms that may represent more individuals than they do businesses, and then your 1 firm will represent mainly individuals without a lot of money to spend. Again, if you're a 4 attorney and you lose your job or you're interested in moving, you're going to have a much easier time getting a position, often in a smaller market than a larger market where there's more attorneys. And there's opportunities in smaller markets, again, because they don't receive as much interest. So again, if you're an attorney if you're a 4 attorney in a very large market, what's happening when you're looking for a job is you're competing with other 4 attorneys and also 5 attorneys for the exact same jobs. And that makes it much more difficult for you to get a job. It's not to say that you won't get a job, because it's very common for 4 attorneys to move between firms in large markets, but it's just more difficult because there's so much competition. In a lot of big markets, the second there's a job, entire recruiting firms will start calling every attorney in a city. And it's also very important to understand about moving laterally as an attorney. Large, sophisticated markets with a high density of attorneys can always find people from the types of from firms of the sort of people they want. They can advertise, they hire recruiters, people are checking their websites for jobs all the time, and recruiters are sending them a lot of people, and they just have their choice. And because of this, large law firms in the largest markets rarely take a chance to hire people when they don't have positions, because they're always going to have attorneys that are interested in working there. It's just how it works. In contrast, if a 4-ranked attorney wants to move to a smaller market, they can often even apply to firms without openings. 4 firms in the largest markets, this is another important thing to understand, will occasionally opportunistically hire people in certain corporate or even litigation practice areas if the person's exceptional. But it's actually more common, if you're a 4 attorney, to be able to move to a smaller market, because you can apply to firms there even if those firms don't have any openings. And the reason is that the 4 firms in smaller markets may only receive a few applicants from different types of attorneys in different practice areas. And because that people rarely come along, if they see your resume and they like it, they may take a chance and say, hey, we don't see a lot of these type of people with this type of experience. So an example would be if you're a capital markets attorney and you want to move to a market in the Midwest. They may not have a big, maybe not Chicago, but a lot of other areas in the Midwest, they might not have a ready supply of people. And so they take chances. And one of the things that I do as a recruiter is I take attorneys from the largest markets that may be ranked a 4 or 5, and I market them to law firms that may have a 4 ranking in smaller markets, even if there's no positions. And this is something that results in placements and interviews every week of the year, practically. It's very smart. So if you're a 4 attorney and you want to get a job at another 4 firm and you're in a major market, one of your strategies should be to find 4 firms in smaller markets. These firms only receive a few applicants from different types of attorneys in different practice areas. And this is just something I do all the time. Again, 4 firms typically hire people from the best law schools, especially as summer attorneys, and also out of entry-level attorneys. They often have very well-defined systems, meaning over time they become very sophisticated in terms of how they review attorneys, who stays, who goes, when you need to, what hours that are expected. They typically will recruit summer associates and have summer programs. And as you get more senior, unless you have a very good relationship with a senior attorney in the firm that has a lot of business, or you have very high hours, or or those sorts of factors, they're very likely to keep you around when you get more senior. Some of them will, but they're also very likely, your typical 4 firm, to hire lateral associates. As a matter of fact, at the lateral level, it's very common for them to hire lots of 4 attorneys. And this, of course, is the bread and butter of a great number of recruiting firms in major cities. And, so an example would be an attorney with a securities law experience, capital markets, may need help getting positions with 4 firms in New York. The same attorney, meaning especially during a slow market where there's not a lot of securities and IPO related work, they may have a very difficult time, but they would be quite marketable for firms without openings in Detroit, Cincinnati, Albany, Rochester, Madison, and Miami, and other 4 ranked firms without openings. And if the same attorney were marketed to 4 firms in New York, those firms might not even respond. Or if a recruiter was involved, they might respond to the recruiter that, hey, what are you doing? And law firms that are ranked at 5 are very difficult to get into. And a 4 attorney is unlikely, again, to be able to get a job there. So the best option is usually to look, especially if the market is tough, to look at a 4 firm in a smaller market. Attorney ranked at 3 also has several options. And again, we're talking about the law firm reviewing you under the idea of, can you do the job? And there's certainly other types of questions that they're asking as well, but this is the one we're talking about now. Law firms ranked at 3 will typically represent companies primarily, but they're representing middle market companies, like companies that are good companies, but they may not be public companies. They're more likely to not be public companies than public companies. They're likely to pay under market. Sometimes they do pay market, but if they pay market, it's likely sometimes they'll pay market for a first-year attorney, and then they'll just increase it a little bit year after year. But they're likely to pay, in many cases, under market. Sometimes the amount they pay under market is a lot. Sometimes it's not, but they are under market in most cases. They simply can't afford to pay that because they're in smaller markets, or if they're not in smaller markets, their clients are smaller. They have to have lower billing rates to be competitive with 4 and 5 firms and other sorts of work. And there are 3 firms in most top 100 U.S. cities. Certainly not at all, but when you get outside the 25 largest cities and you go into the cities that are less populous than the 25 largest cities, the best firms in those markets are likely to be 3s. And again, there might be some 4s. There's lots of 3-ranked firms in Syracuse, New York. Those would be, and it's just an example of a smaller market, those would be considered some of the top law firms in that market. The law firms ranked at 3 will do a lot of the day-to-day work of their clients. The work is likely to have attorneys that may not have as much experience in narrow aspects of the practice area. So if they were doing, for example, real estate, they wouldn't just do real estate leasing. They would do real estate purchase and sale. They would do maybe some residential and commercial real estate. Whereas if you were in New York at a 4 firm, they would only do leases maybe, and they would only do transactions and commercial transactions. And a corporate attorney may practice M&A, securities, general corporate, and some finance, and they just work on different aspects of corporate instead of one. And whereas that's less likely to occur in a 4 firm or a 5 firm. And an attorney at a 4 firm would likely do just one form of finance, for example, project finance, and not all sorts of different types of finance work. And law firms ranked at 3 will provide a lot of opportunities from candidates for these firms seeking positions. It's less difficult to get a job in a 3 firm, but the pay is going to be lower. But at the same time, these are good firms. These are good business-facing firms. And again, people that are at 3 firms, very often, it's very common, by the way, in transactional related practice areas for a 3 attorney to move to a 4 firm. And if you're at a 3 firm right now, what I can tell you is 4 firms like people from 3 firms. And the reason is, especially in a lot of these transactional practice areas, that someone that's at a 3 firm really wants to work at a 4 firm. So they're going to come in with a good attitude, with a lot of enthusiasm, feeling like they need to prove themselves. They'll work a lot of hours. will do a really good job. And so that's how that works. And so your 4 firms do 3 attorneys, and they move all the time, especially in strong legal markets. When it's a really good legal market and things go in cycles, but when it's a really good legal market, certain practice areas would tend to be in very high demand, again, corporate, and large markets do not often have enough attorneys. So attorneys ranked at 3 in certain practice areas often move to 4 firms. Very common. And 4 firms are smart hiring these 3 attorneys. Now, they may not have as good a training, and there may be issues because they've worked on smaller clients, but they're often very enthusiastic, especially if they're not in the largest markets. These attorneys are likely to be hungry, and their moving up is likely to be very attractive to law firms. A law firm ranked at 4 hiring a 3 attorney may believe that they're going to work hard. They're not going to have the same sense of entitlement that the typical, I should say, 4 attorney has. And in addition, an attorney that's ranked at 3 is often going to have a much easier time moving between law firms because their salary and what they expect to be paid is going to be lower than your 4 and 5 attorneys. And if you take a 4 attorney, and what happens is sometimes 4 attorneys can't get jobs with other 4 firms, so they move to a 3 firm. But because the salary is so lower, they may believe that they need to make a higher salary. When market conditions change or they can get a job with a 4 firm, they'll move. And again, if a law firm's hired directly from a 3 firm, they know that the person is unlikely to have issues with their compensation, is not going to think they're better than the 3 attorneys, and is less likely to leave than a 4 attorney might. And again, 3 attorneys can often find positions in their own market. They can move markets. However, they're not as likely to be appealing to law firms in other markets as 4 and 5 attorneys, but that doesn't mean they're not. Attorneys move from 3 firms in small markets to larger markets all the time. And there are a lot more 3 attorneys than 4 attorneys. So when you think of the average attorney at a 4 firm, there's a lot of them, but you're limited to not even all the AmLaw 100 law firm, 200, 100, 200 law firms. And there's just, you start getting into all the firms in markets all over the country that service, your mid-sized and smaller businesses. So there's a lot of 3 ranked attorneys. And because there's so many of them, a lot of these 3 firms don't need to hire laterally from attorneys that are from smaller to mid-sized markets, because there's often a lot of those 3 attorneys in their market already. You may be a 3 attorney and you should understand your position in terms of your ability to move markets. And because there's going to be a lot of 3 attorneys in your market, and especially if you don't have any connection to the market you're trying to relocate to, the law firm, other 3 firm is going to be a little difficult. But the exception, of course, is in hard to find practice areas in other markets. And practice areas and their marketability will always depend on market conditions. Some of the most in-demand practice areas, as I've said several times in this call, are going to be your transactional ones, which are going to be like patent prosecution, corporate, land use, real estate, and things like that. And everything's about the law of supply and demand. There's far fewer attorneys in many transactional practice areas than in litigation. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but the majority of attorneys are litigation and insurance defense, and then criminal, family law, and things like that. And is that companies are represented by 3 attorneys, which is very important to understand. So it is company facing. People do have money to pay bills. The firms are likely to be good-sized, decent-sized firms, but the clients of the 3 firms are less likely to care about the credentials of the 3 attorneys in the 4 or 5 firms. One reason for that is your 4 and 5 firms are likely to have general counsels and assistant general counsels and other people that are very carefully reviewing the types of attorneys that are there and making sure that they're getting the best for their money. Whereas your 3 firms may have in-house counsel, but they're less likely to be more concerned, and they're under kind of more of a mandate to save money. And all these kind of very strict rules about people getting aggressive performance reviews and leaving and summer associate programs and all that sort of thing are less likely to happen with your 3 firms. And because they're less demanding, they're often much easier to get positions with. because they also pay lower salaries. They're easier. And then your two-rank firms are most likely to represent individuals, and some of them will represent smaller companies. Practice areas that tend to be two will be things like high-end divorce, meaning divorce clients with a lot of money, insurance defense, typically not always insurance coverage, which would be like a 3 and sometimes even a 4, but insurance defense where you're representing individuals and then defending them on their behalf, but you're also working for a company. And this type of work, sometimes it would be employment defense, but the idea is that there's a lot of downward pressure on bills many times, and the two-rank firms will be more likely to represent individuals and companies, whereas the 3 firms are more likely to represent companies and individuals, and they're likely not even to be able to pay as much money as your 3-rank firms. So when you start getting into the 2-rank firms, your 5-rank firms are top of market, your 4-rank firms are top of market, and your 2-rank firms starting to get into, if the starting salary of a top-ranked firm is $2, your salary of a 2-rank firm, your 3-rank firm might be $80 or $75. I'm sorry, $125 or $150, 1.5 or 1.25, and then your salaries of your 2-rank might be $1, meaning 200,000 versus 150 to 175 versus, you get the idea about how the numbers go down. And these 2 firms could be in all practice areas, but they're most likely to be in practice areas where the billing rates and the amount of billing money that can be billed the clients is less. Insurance defense is a commodity because insurance companies get sued all the time. Their clients do, so they want to keep bills low. We're talking about auto accidents and things like that, and billing rates where the amount billed to clients is less. So most 3, 4, and 5 firms, again, are likely to have in-house counsel. In insurance defense, there's also in-house counsel, but a lot of the 2 clients are unlikely to have in-house counsel. So it's probably equal. Your 3-rank firms are likely to have in-house counsel, but your 2-rank firms may have them half the time or less. And the 2-ranked firms the attorneys are often going to have the most luck moving within their own market. So if you're a 5 attorney, you typically will try to get a job with a 5 firm in your market. If you're a 4 firm, you typically will try, but you have the option of moving to 4 firms in smaller markets, or always 3 firms in your market and then 3 firms in other markets, or 4 firms in other markets. When you get down to a 3, it becomes more difficult to move to other markets, but you can if there is the economy in your practice areas in demand. So very common for a 3 attorney to move from Miami to New York or things like that if they're in the right practice area, but less common, and that would be a transactional practice areas in most cases, but not as common as moving locally. And then the 2 firms, typically people will move in their own markets because these attorneys are very plentiful representing individuals. This is where most of the legal jobs in the country are that are representing a mix of companies. And there's a lot, most of the attorneys, by the way, are 1s, but there's a lot of 2 firms and a lot of people doing 2 work. And because there's so many in the local market, law firms often do not see the need to take a chance on someone from another market when they're hiring 2 attorneys. They pay much lower salaries than 3, 4, and 5 firms. They have a more difficult time attracting attorneys to work there. They will often be very desperate for local people, but they won't pay enough. And those attorneys that are going to work there will often do sheepishly, meaning they won't take the jobs with a lot of enthusiasm, but not always, but quite often. And if a 2-ranked attorney is trying to move to a 3 firm, they're not going to receive as good of a reception many times as they would like. It can be much more difficult, and a 3 attorney or a 5 attorney may receive a better reception. And this just because there's so many attorneys that are ranked a 2 in many markets. Not always, but quite often. One thing that's interesting about my practice as a recruiter is when I started, almost all the placements were at 4 and 5 firms because that was where every recruiter was typically trained to place people. And that's just how recruiting works. But in reality, in my opinion, there's an awful lot of demand at 2 firms and also 3 firms. So these are very good markets, especially in certain practice areas. So if you're a divorce attorney, or trust and estates and insurance defense, there's a lot of people that could be interested in you. And there can be pockets of massive activities for some 2 attorneys when they're seeking to relocate. Trust and estates and family law are both huge practice areas for relocating. I've seen family law attorneys that are in, San Antonio move to Wisconsin or, Tennessee and get tons of interest. I saw one, I think I talked about this maybe last week, that was in somewhere in Colorado and moved to Wisconsin and got an incredible reception in one county that wasn't even Madison or one of the larger cities. So they can often be very marketable in different practice areas. And I've seen trust and estates attorneys get 15, 20 interviews moving from small firms to other small firms and moving markets. You can do very well as a 2 attorney, but in most cases, much easier to move locally. And then 1-ranked attorneys are typically, this is what most of the market does. Now, being a 1 is not a bad thing. All that means is you're representing individuals. And let me be very clear. People that are ranked a 1 often make the most money out of any of these attorneys, if that's your objective. And they often do work that serves an incredible public interest. So your typical 1-ranked attorney will do personal injury, which is representing individuals. They may do your smaller family law firms. They may do criminal law. They may have a small trust and estates practice. There's all sorts of practice areas that a 1-ranked attorney can be in. Typically, though, these positions pay the least. What do they pay? In a major market, a personal injury attorney may start at or lateral at $50,000, $60,000 a year when the market may be paying, say, $180,000. So are often not the most, but the clients are consumers or personal injury, which is different, but they're consumers without large budgets. And a 4-ranked firm can send their client a bill of a couple $100,000 a month, and the client is just going to take it. Whereas a bill of $5,000 for a 1-ranked firm is going to be way too much. And 1-ranked firms are unwilling to spend a lot of money on legal service. Clients are unwilling to spend a lot of money on legal service. So what happens at your 1-ranked firms and also at your 2-ranked firms is the emphasis comes on getting stuff done as quickly as possible instead of necessarily being very thorough and going into a lot of detail. And this is what happens as you move up the line in terms of the prestige of the firm and the pay of the firm is there's not a lot of time to work on things because there's just not a lot of money being spent on the matters. And therefore, your 1-ranked attorney isn't necessarily going to have the same way of doing their practice area and as a 1-ranked attorney, as a 2 and 3 and 4 attorney, meaning as more money is spent by the client on matters, the attorney has to have more analytical ability and an ability to look at things and spending a lot of time. And that's why in a 4 or 5 ranked firm, before a partner signs a pleading, you may have 3 or 4 levels of junior associate, maybe a paralegal, a junior associate, a mid-level associate, another mid-level associate, a senior associate, and all these people looking at things before a partner even sees it, because things are done in a real level of detail. And of course, your 1-ranked attorney isn't likely to have the qualification as your 3 to 5 ranked attorney. And all that means is there's at least a couple hundred law schools in the country. So there's nothing wrong with going to a law school ranked 150 or 175 or whatever the ranking is, because this is where most of the attorneys are. Everyone is always looking up and saying, oh, attorneys you need to go to a great law school and all that stuff. And you really don't. Most people don't. So you shouldn't feel bad if you're at a 1-ranked firm. All it means is you're working for individuals and not companies. And frankly, 1-ranked attorneys go to trial and court more often, or they have more contact with clients. And there's a lot of advantages, but there's a lot more 1 and ranked 2 attorneys than there are 3 attorneys, and fewer 4 attorneys, and even fewer 5 attorneys. So scarcity, of course, is something that the market rewards, but being able to do the job The reason we bring up this question, or I bring up this question, and I say this is important, is because when you're applying to firms, they're asking themselves, does this person have the training to do this kind of work? And do they want to do this type of work? I'm sorry, but if you're at a 2-rank firm, your odds of getting hired by a 4-rank firm are very slim, because they're going to say, I don't think this person can do the job. They don't have the training, they don't know how to do it. Whereas if you're a 3-rank firm working primarily from businesses and they apply to a 4-rank firm, they're going to believe you can do the job. If you're a 4-rank firm applying to a 5-rank firm, they're going to think this person can do the job, but this isn't how we do business. We tend to hire from our summer associate program and so forth. I don't think I've ever heard of Cravath or Wachtell hiring laterally. Most of these firms don't. It's very rare. So that's what you need to understand when a law firm's asking when you can do the job. When you're moving laterally, the lesson is that 5 attorneys and 4 attorneys will have more luck moving to other markets or smaller markets than they may have in their existing market. And if you're trying to apply to 4 firms and you're at 5 firms or you're at a 4 firm, it's going to be very difficult. If you're at a 3 firm and trying to apply to 2 firms, you may have some luck, but if you're doing business facing things, you're unlikely to be in a practice area that a 2 firm would do. 2 firms do represent businesses, but not as much. And then moving to other markets and so forth, it's going to be much more difficult at a 1 or 2 firm, because there tends to be a overabundance of 1 or 2 firms. And the reason is, so I just want everyone to understand, most attorneys out there go to 1 and 2 firms. It's just how it works. You have 200 plus law schools, and then you only have a limited number of top 15 law schools, and that's not even 10% of all the law people graduating from law school each year. So come on, you have to just understand kind of the laws and supply and demand. So when you're moving markets, you have to understand the prestige level of the firms and where you're most likely to get a job. That's one of the things. And so this kind of dynamic that runs in the background, I apologize, because I think that this is maybe a little bit, not difficult, but it's very in-depth what I'm giving, and I'd like to be just very direct. But I know everyone that's watching this understands, but you have to apply. A law firm's going to believe you can do the work based on the rank of where you're at. So it's not just, I have this great resume, it's where were you trained? So that's what they're asking. They care about the firm you're at. They care about the training you have. So if you are at a big firm, what would a big firm be? Aiken Gump. You're at a big firm like Aiken Gump, it would be a 4. And you apply to Morgan Lewis. Morgan Lewis isn't going to care so much about where you went to law school and how you did. If you have 3 or 4 years or 2 years of experience at Aiken Gump, that's really all they care about in your practice area. That's what they're most interested in. So everyone thinks their grades matter. No, it matters the level of firm that you're trained at, because you will be trained to look at matters in more or less depth depending on the rank of your firm. So that means, can you do the job? And I hope I explained that well, but the way to explain it is just to understand that at your 5 firms, you're going to go into incredible depth on matters. And that's how you're going to be trained. You're going to look at things in a lot of depth. At a 4 firm, you're going to also look at things in a lot of depth, but maybe not as much. In a 3 firm, less. 2 firm, less. 1 firm, even less. So that's how they understand if you can do the job. All the law firm is thinking, and I don't know that anybody's ever talked about this, but that's what I'm talking about. All a law firm is thinking when they view your resume is, does this person have the training to do the job? That's what they're asking. So peer firm or close to peer firm is what they're asking. The next question that's extremely important when you're moving markets is the law firm's asking, will you do the job long term? And what that means is the law firm's looking at your background when you're moving, and they're asking whether or not you look like you'll stick around. This is especially for an attorney that's moving lateral. It's not your first job. They want to make sure that if they hire you, the second you show up there, you're not going to be trying to move out of their market. It's well known, and this is one of the most common placements that I make, is if an attorney is relocating to a market where they grew up or where their spouse is from, it doesn't matter where it is. It could be, I don't know, anywhere, Reno, Nevada. If you're working in, I'm just making up markets, Atlanta, and you want to move to Reno, and you're from Reno, those firms are going to be interested in you. And you're far more likely to get a job in any market if you have family and other related people that are working there. The reason is because they think you're going to go there, buy a house, settle down, work, and try to keep your job. And that means you'll work harder. It means you're not going to be looking to work at other markets. It means that they're going to introduce you to your clients, and you're going to be someone there working for their clients. And law firms believe you're going to move there and stay. They're also going to have fewer concerns about why you're relocating to that market. They're going to think this person's moving here because they want to stay here. And they're believing you're going to set up roots. You're unlikely to move. Now, if you want to move your existing market from your existing market, meaning you want to relocate to a market where you don't have any connections, the law firm is going to be a little concerned. Now, if they have an opening that matches what you do, they're going to be interested in you, but they're going to also wonder, why would this person decide to move markets, even if you're a 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever, because are they going to wonder, is this person not doing a good job? Are they not liked? They're starting to ask all those questions where they don't necessarily ask them if you're from that market, and you start looking like you're disloyal. Also, sometimes if you're moving your existing market, they're wondering this. It's much easier for an attorney to get a job in the market where they're from than it necessarily is to get a job in a new market. So if you're leaving your current firm to join a similar firm in the same market, law firms typically know you're likely to move again. So it's much difficult, a little bit more difficult. There are attorneys, lots of them, that move markets from their existing markets every year or two, and they do it like clockwork. And law firms know if they hire these attorneys, they're unlikely to stay. And again, I talked about this earlier, but law firms do not like hiring people that are likely to leave. It creates issues for the law firm's clients. The clients don't like it when the people working on the matters are constantly rotated in and out. It's expensive for the clients because someone else needs to get up to speed. And then when the attorney leaves to go somewhere else, it can often lower the morale of the attorneys because they think, whoa, what's wrong where we're working? Why are people leaving? And the attorneys wonder, is it better to be somewhere else? What's wrong? And again, it costs a lot of money and time. So when that attorney that leaves isn't doing the work, that means the work's not getting done and they're losing money. It means they need to spend time and resources hiring someone new to replace you. And it hurts the firm. But if you're relocating to another area or another market, the firm is just going to wonder, are you going to stay there if you're hired? And there's lots of markets in the U.S. where a law firm knows that the odds of you staying if you're hired are better than others. A law firm, if you're relocating from Miami to Bakersfield, California, where there's lots of firms, you can believe it, but there are, is unlikely to stay there, absent some connection to the area. And it's just not an area that people are really trying hard to go to. An attorney from Los Angeles, if they don't have any connections, is unlikely to stay in Birmingham, Alabama. They're going to get there and think, why aren't there more good restaurants? It's just how it is. Why is it so hot and humid? And so law firms are off the beaten path, are smart enough to know that unless you have some connection there, unless you have some practice area that really matches what they do, they know you're unlikely to stay. Just think about what you would think if you were a firm in a small market and someone was applying from a huge market. You would think that they would probably not stay. And so law firm is, for a lateral attorney trying to get into a different market, your case is going to be strongest if the law firm believes you'll stay if they get hired. Now, I'll tell you something that I see a lot. I see it every single day. Attorneys from Canada trying to relocate, or Australia or China, or people from other countries trying to get jobs in the US, and often they'll have an LLM and stuff. But law firms are often reluctant to hire them and don't, because what happens to those attorneys is invariably they get homesick and leave. And not always, but a lot. Law firms believe that you're more likely to stay if you have an exact match for an opening that they have. So law firm has an opening, you're an exact match. There's not a lot of openings for that type of person in the market for whatever reason, and they know you're likely to stay because it would be very difficult for you to find another position. An example would be Washington, D.C. There's a lot of demand for FDA attorneys, but when you start getting out of D.C. and you go to markets like San Diego, where there are a few FDA openings from time to time that I've placed people into, the firm in San Diego their ears are going to perk up, especially if they're like a 4 firm, because they're never going to get a lot of applications. So they like that. If you're attempting to relocate markets, law firms also believe if you're bringing your children with you and you may have contacts in the market, meaning maybe you went to school there, or you have a lot of family there, or maybe I don't know, who knows. But if you've taken the bar there, or if you bought a house there or something, they know you're likely to stay. And so they will hire you. But again, you can't just, unless there's an opening in a dearth of people like you in that market, you can't just expect to move markets. You have to take all this into account because law firms are asking, will you do the job long term? So far, I've talked about, can you do the job? So you need to understand the prestige level, but being able to do the job long term is also a question they're asking. So they're looking for things in your background that suggest you can't. If you are from China and applying for a job in the US because you have an LLM, absent some extraordinary reason that makes it look like you're going to stay, no law firm's going to hire you. Or unless you're in some practice area and have some sort of training that they absolutely need, it's going to be very difficult for them to hire you. Children are good if you bring children with you. If you purchase a house, they know it would cost you a lot of money to sell the house. But law firms need to feel like they have a lot of control over you and that there's something that keeps you in the area. It's very difficult for people to commit to a law firm if it looks like you're going to leave. And it's very difficult for a law firm to commit to you. And if you're a 4 or 5 candidate, even when there are doubts, your relative scarcity in the market may make them interested in you if it doesn't look like you're going to stay. So I have discussions all the time with firms in smaller markets, and what they say is if a firm is looking for someone that's a securities attorney, they'll say, if you have an attorney that is from Cincinnati and working in a big market like New York or Palo Alto and wants to come home, then please keep us in mind because we need someone like that. That's just how they think. They don't say, if you have a securities attorney, send them to us and we'll see how they like Cincinnati. So the scarcity of attorneys in your practice area is always going to factor into that. But it's just, and then another point is that 4 candidates often going to experience a lot of very good results when they try to relocate markets, and the rarity of a 4 attorney in smaller markets often can help, especially if they need someone in your practice area. The attorney from San Francisco, or you're moving to Bismarck or New York to Savannah, people do get positions like that all the time, and they often get them in the door. But in most cases, when these moves happen, there has to be some sort of connection to the market. And so that's something that you need to understand. If you are moving markets, you either are an expert in your practice area, or you're moving to your home market, or where you grew up and you have contacts, or your spouse or significant other is from, or you've taken extraordinary actions to be in that market, meaning you've taken the bar there, you've looked at houses, you have some reason for being there. I've seen people before move to markets and they might have been like a professional skier and they want to be in Colorado and they're currently working in Los Angeles or someplace where they can't do that. And law firms like that. But you have to have some sort of reason, in most cases, for being in the market, or you need to be in a very well-defined practice area where there's a dearth of people like you when you're moving markets. This is very important that you have some sort of connection and the law firm believes that you're likely to stay long term. So just moving to a market and having no connection there, law firms, especially if you're taking a lower salary and you have no, law firms know you're unlikely to stay and they immediately become suspicious of you and it's harder to be hired. So that's why in many cases, if you're looking at other markets, it may be more difficult for you to find a job. Another thing that law firms are asking is if you can be managed. The law firms are always going to be very interested in whether or not they believe you can be managed. And management of anybody that's working in any business is important. And law firm, there's lots of attorneys that I'm sure that you have seen in your career that have been difficult to manage, meaning that the attorney is going to do what's asked of them. They're not going to make trouble. They're not going to constantly be talking behind the back of their supervisors. They're going to have not respect for management. They're going to be going from office to office, spreading rumors and talking negatively about the firm. They're difficult to get along with. They're not, and the most one analogy that I give a lot is the difference between soldiers and generals. And so a soldier is expected to do what's asked of them, follow instructions, and not really give it a lot of thought. Meaning, you want me to go do this? I'll do it, no problem. Whereas they're also expected to respect authority. They're expected to believe in what their superiors want them to do and defend their country. They're expected to put the needs of the group, meaning their superiors, but also the people they work with, above their own. Now, this is I would almost as far as to say that these sorts of thought patterns are almost many times genetic, or maybe you're raised to think a certain way, but most people like this do not question why they're given orders, and they expect the people that are giving them the orders to know best, and they know that their success and the success of the group is based on following orders and respecting authority. And you can imagine what it would be like. And if you were running a military and everybody was doing what they want and questioning orders and talking negatively about the firm and about the country and about their superiors and the generals, it just wouldn't work. Generals are the ones that give orders, strategize, and lead soldiers. They're in charge. They're responsible for the outcomes and expected to use people to follow orders. And so in the most efficient and strategic means possible, if people working for them do not follow orders and don't fall into line, they either shape them up or ship them out. And this is what law firms are looking for. Law firms, when they're hiring laterally, are always looking for soldiers. When they're hiring new attorneys, they're all people right out of law school or in law school, they're looking for soldiers. Most law firm associates, and frankly, most partners are soldiers, meaning the partners respect authority, they do what they're told to do, and law firms also have committees and other governing bodies. But regardless of the attorney's title, most attorneys out there are soldiers, and you have to be, because this is just how businesses and law firms work. They want to hire people that want to be part of the group and follow instructions and not question the leadership. And certain people are very good at working for others, and others aren't. So it's just how it works. Some people are able to do it. Some people are natural entrepreneurs or natural people that want to have ideas and start things. And I talk quite often about some of my first hires as recruiters. Again, keep in mind, I've been doing this work for not a quarter of a century, but a long time, close. And when I started recruiting, two of my first recruiters had very good career histories. One woman had worked for her previous employer for 15 years and the other for 8 years. And in addition to those people, I hired about 15 other attorneys as recruiters who had worked for their previous employers for 1 and 5 years. The reason I hired those 15 people was, in most cases, I talked to them. I realized that they weren't cut out for working in law firms, but they might be good at recruiting, I thought, and I hired them to do things. And the difference between these hires was very notable. In almost all cases, the ones that were at their previous employers for a year stayed with me for a year. The ones that were there for 2 stayed for 2. The ones that had been at their previous jobs for 3 stayed with 3s. And this is the same pattern of attorney resumes. People tend to jump around to law firms at similar time periods. But the woman that had been in her previous job for 15 years and stayed with me for 15 years, and the one that had been with their job for 8 years and stayed with me for also 8 years, and they both didn't question the orders I gave, were loyal, were enthusiastic, believed that I was giving good orders, tried to talk to other people that were leaving or not doing well in following orders to keep them around. And the difference between people that, attorneys, recruiters, and others who stay long periods of time is striking. The attorneys who stay the longest typically don't allow themselves to get upset. Like what you hear when you talk to attorneys, they could be at a firm that's 100 plus years old, and they'll say, or 150, they'll say, oh, the morale's really low here. Lots of people are leaving. This firm's going to be around probably another 150 years. What are they talking about? This is what you hear. And the attorneys who stay the longest typically are soldiers, and that's what law firms are looking for. And these attorneys don't complain. I mean, they do, but they keep it to themselves. They try to not take sides in office politics. Bad idea. If you get on the wrong side of office politics, that can hurt you. They're often not too concerned with what their competitors and others are doing. Yeah, one of the funniest things I ever had was I went to a dinner with one of our recruiters that was meeting someone that she had placed. And I was sitting and the person that she had placed had gone to the University of Chicago Law School and was at a huge firm. I think it was at like Winston & Strawn that she placed them at. And the person started saying that they were very upset and wanted to move because the firm used to let them park in the building at this parking that was hundreds of dollars a month, but now it put them in a parking garage across the street. And it was dehumanizing, and they had to walk 3 minutes or something. And this is the reason a lot of people will move. And I guess I wouldn't be happy either, but law firms need people that are going to put their head down and work. And so this is something that law firms are looking at when they interview and when they see you. They're looking, can we control this person? Is this person controllable? And is this person going to be able to be managed? And people who don't last and have problems typically are always finding things wrong. There's something wrong with their bonus or something wrong with whatever, and they're never going to be fully committed. They're always going to be interested in other things. They're always going to find reasons that the grass can be greener. They're going to not like assignments. They're going to say certain assignments are below them. The clients are below them. They're going to make all sorts of problems, and they're not going to be interested in being managed. They may pay lip service to this, but they're not going to be interested in being managed, and they're going to change their tune quite often. But when you're moving firms and you want to move markets, you need to look like someone that can be managed. There's no question about it. If you look like anything other than someone that can be managed, that's a big problem. It's not. So what do attorneys look like that can't be managed? They will have entrepreneurial activities on their resume. And again, there's nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur, but in most cases, entrepreneurs are people that they're going to do their own things. They will leave a law firm to go do something where they look like a big deal. They will not look like soldiers. They will try to be taking the limelight and look like they're better than the generals. And very easy to do. You can talk about all these activities and things that you did, but do so in a way that makes you look too independent. And regardless of where you're moving, law firms may believe you're going to have a hard time being managed. So why do I bring this up as well? In this presentation about moving, one of the largest obstacles that law firms face when they're hiring attorneys from higher ranked firms is that those attorneys, if they come from a 5 or 4 firm, believe that they're better often. 4 firm that's ranked very highly and international with offices all over the world, maybe not as good as another 4 firm. They may believe that because they came from such a good firm that they're better than the attorneys and they should be staffed on more critical matters and be given more important assignments. I've seen attorneys coming from 5 firms going to 4 firms, practically having nervous breakdowns at 4 firms because they believe that they should be treated with a huge level of deference and respect. Same thing goes for attorneys from a lot of law schools, like sometimes Yale Law School. The attorney from a top 10 law school, could be Michigan or Virginia, what are working in a smaller market. These people sometimes can be very difficult to manage. They'll resent being managed by attorneys that they don't think are as good as them. They think they should be more challenged and get better assignments. And if the law firm picks up on that when they're interviewing you, or if they see things on your resume that makes it look like that, they're not going to hire you. They do not want to hire people that think they're special and that think they're better than the market that they may be moving to. come on, if you're at a four firm in New York City or Los Angeles, and you're moving to a firm in Boulder, Colorado, you may think that you're more special than the people in Boulder, Colorado. And if you come off as that and with a little bit of arrogance and talking about how you work on these big clients and work on these important matters, and this three firm hears that, they're going to not hire you. Lawyers that believe they're better than their employers are simply not manageable. And lots of people are like this, especially young attorneys. Like, they don't make the connection of what I'm telling you right now. It doesn't matter if you went to a great law school. It doesn't matter if you're at a big law firm. But when you move, that law firm sure as hell better believe that you're going to be manageable. Because if you're not, who would hire you? Think about you. Like something as simple as hiring someone to take care of your kids, a babysitter or a nanny or something. If that nanny comes in and says, I've worked for the most important families in the United States. My last job was with Meghan Markle or whatever, or not Meghan Markle, whatever, someone that's very important. And then they're working for you and they have an attitude about it, like they think they're more important. That's going to be a huge turnoff. So if you're moving from a major law firm or a major market, you better do everything you can to look like you're manageable and will follow the directions and would be grateful to have the job and do whatever you could to help the firm. No one wants to hire anyone who believes that they're better or more talented than the people around them. They just don't. If you're an attorney at a 3 or 4 firm and moving to a larger market, then the law firm believes you will be manageable, meaning they're better than you, or they have more that you're likely to want to learn from them. And especially if you have stability in your previous positions. Let's talk a little bit about stability just real briefly. And I talked about that earlier, but people that are stable and have been at their previous employer a long time are likely to be manageable. When you ask attorneys that have worked in several firms why they left, they usually give you these, not always, but a lot of time, these inconsequential businesses. A reason they lost a client, there were problems with this or that at the firm, and a lot of times it's not manageable, and law firms don't like it. If you're in a larger market and you're moving there from a smaller market, if you want to move to a large market from a smaller market, they're likely to believe you're going to appreciate being in the bigger market and more manageable. There's some markets, by the way, which would be Palo Alto and San Francisco and New York, where if you want to move there, especially in California, where you probably need the bar, they're going to take it as a matter of course. Of course they want to be here. Why wouldn't anybody be here? They're definitely going to be manageable. But law firms in larger markets just believe that they know how things are done. They're superior. Of course you want to be part of them and you will be manageable. But if you're moving from a larger market to a smaller market, law firms are going to be a little bit nervous. So you need to look like and give the idea that you're manageable. And what I'm telling you, all the stuff I'm telling you will change your ability to move firms and move markets. But you need to really give the impression that you're going to be easy to work with. You're going to do what's expected. You're going to work hard. You're going to do whatever the firm needs. You're going to adapt to their culture. And so attorneys from smaller markets are always concerned that attorneys from larger markets are going to look down upon them. And they do. Frankly, you have 2 areas of the country. It's very interesting. You have the coast, which might be this big, and then everything in between. Most of the attorneys in the country, or most of the people in the country, there's just as many people on the coastal areas and outside the coastal areas than there are in the rest of the country. It's very interesting. And so a lot of times the attorneys in those areas outside of those coastal areas, which mean most of the country, or half the country, believe that people from larger markets consider themselves better and superior, or smaller markets, to people from larger markets. They're very self-conscious. And the last thing a firm in a smaller market wants to do is bring on someone who thinks they know how to do things better. What does that do for their culture? What does that do for the people that are there? How does that make the partners feel? How does it make the associates feel? So if you're relocating from a larger market to a smaller one, you really need to convince the firm that in the smaller market that you'll be able to be managed. And manageability is often the seniority levels. The more senior you are, the more the law firm, the more you'll think, I know how things are done. I know how the system works. You don't need to tell me what to do. I've been doing it for a long time. And so often experience can be a drawback for a lot of law firms because senior attorneys often become resistant to training and doing things the way the law firm wants. They start saying things like, and this is very common too, a large law firm will do things in a certain way. The large law firm will have certain ways that they do work on cases and matters. And the smaller law firm, their job is to save their clients money and get things out the door faster. So what a lot of times happens, especially with senior attorneys moving to smaller firms, is they'll say, that's malpractice. And meaning that not doing a super good job is malpractice. And then a lot of times attorneys that might have been fired or lost jobs or had problems often become very difficult to manage. And so again, if you're a senior attorney, you need to look like a follower. I'm sorry, but unless you have a big book of business or something to offer the firm, or they're going to put you in a completely client-centered role, they're going to want to believe that you're going to follow orders, do what you're asked, take the position seriously, and commit to whatever you're working. So one of the problems that I see with a lot of senior attorney resumes is they just go into all this detail about how great they are and how they've managed all these matters and things. Just imagine if the law firm you're applying to doesn't need that they want someone that maybe hasn't managed all these matters, that has a different type of experience, and wants someone to do the job, and especially when you're relocating, because there's always going to be a little bit of preconception that you may be difficult to manage. So if you're moving markets, you may often have better luck moving to a smaller market than a larger one, because the idea, that the law firm will have a difficult time managing you will more likely make you less marketable in areas where there's not as many applicants with this baggage. And similarly, if you have a lot of moves on your resume and you want to look at other markets, law firms are also going to believe that there's going to be an oversupply of you. Then moving firms is often a sign you can't be managed. And I hope that makes sense about being able to be managed. And being able to be managed basically means, especially when you're moving markets, does it look like this person is going to click with us, do the work, and commit to doing the work, and be able to be controlled. No one wants to bring in someone that's too independent and can't be controlled. Sending signs that you can't be controlled is a nightmare for the firms, because people that are above you want to feel important. They want to give you assignments. They want to feel like you'll do them. They want to feel like you'll respect them. They want to feel like you'll respect their firm. They want to feel like you'll make the other people you're working with feel good about where they're working, and all those sorts of things. The other thing that I always think about, and I think is also important, is the person that leaves at some point or is having problems being managed is angry a lot of the time. They resent the management. They resent being told what to do. They may be, they may undermine associates and the people that they're working with or that are above them. They may be hostile. There's just all sorts of issues. Law firms do not like it when people look like they can't be managed. And if you're moving markets, you need to look very manageable, because the law firm is taking a risk on hiring someone from another market, and they do not want someone to show up that's going to tell them what to do, especially if you're going into a smaller market where they're already going to be defensive, or a smaller firm. This next one is interesting. I believe that this is one of the most important ones. This is, do you want the job? When you're moving markets, law firms, like you would if you were hiring someone, want to hire people who really want to work there. They want people that are enthusiastic, because that makes them feel good. And while it's common for attorneys to investigate lots of markets when looking for a job, law firms are much more likely to hire attorneys who really want a perfect job, who really want a job, compared to attorneys who do not want a job. So think about it. Like, if you show up and you're just fired up about working somewhere and you've investigated it and you really want to be in this firm that's in another location, then they're really going to want to hire you. And some positions are absolutely perfect. There are positions that perfectly take advantage of your skills and your experience and the types of clients that could be like they fit like a key into a lock. Patent attorneys can have rare skills in a certain aspect of patent law, doing a certain very unique thing, even though they may be working in Houston, Texas. never been to Minnesota. There may be a firm in Minnesota that has a job that matches exactly the kind of work that they do. There may be 50 people in the entire United States, or 10 or 20 that do that type of work. If you apply to that type of firm, then the law firm's going to think you really want it, because those things don't come along very often. And if a law firm has a perfect position from you, that you're not just applying there because you're just applying to every firm, the law firm believes that is quite likely to be interested in you. And if they're relocating, the law firm, the best odds of getting a position are going to be when you have a position that's very rare, takes advantage of your skills and something you really want. And the more you investigate the market, investigate your various job postings, and the more niche your experience is, the more likely you are to find a perfect position and be able to move. So let's think about that. I just want to think about this for a minute and make sure you understand. Most people, when they're sending out their resume, are sending out these broad things to law firms, or writing the same cover letter for every job, and it doesn't stick out. But it does stick out when you have experience that exactly matches a position that law firm has, even if it's in another market. So your odds of getting a position in any market in the United States, if the law firm has a perfect position that matches your background, and your background is very rare, then you should be moving markets. You should try to work in markets where you might not even normally even apply. Very important. And I've had countless occasions when I got attorney a position in another market where they were incredibly well suited for that market and that firm. So these are very important points. If a law firm sees that they have a job you really want and are good fits, they get very excited. They think, wow, we've been looking for this person in this niche practice area for a long time, and we finally found them. And if that person really wants that job, that law firm is being very smart hiring that person. And this enthusiasm is going to go throughout the firm. It's going to raise the spirits of everyone hiring that attorney if they really want the job. It's going to raise their enthusiasm. It's going to raise the enthusiasm of the other attorneys in the firm. And if someone really wants to work in a given law firm, then they're going to be more manageable, and they're also going to be more likely to stick around. Think about it, especially if it's very difficult. If you're moving markets, convincing the firm that you really want to work there and the position is meaningful to you is massively important. Just put yourself in the position of the law firm. They're going to want to hire someone that really wants to work there. And if someone really wants a job, you can often move from a small firm to a large firm, from a 3 firm to a 4 firm. And if you really want to work with someone at a specific firm, like someone and you always admired them for the type of work, you've followed their career, law firms are going to love that, especially if you're moving from another market. So think about that, like how you position yourself when you're moving markets. You have to look like you really want the job. If you really want the job, there has to be something unique that you pick out about the firm that matches your background completely. These are the kind of people that get hired. It's also, by the way, a way to get into schools and a way to get clients and all sorts of things. You talk to a client, you say, I really want you because I want to work on your behalf because I have this experience and that. These are very important skills to understand how to do them. And then, of course, another one is, do we like you? And you would hire people that you like if you were a law firm, and people want to hire people that they like. We feel good about people that we like. And one of the most important components of any move is being liked by the people that are hiring you. Human nature is a lot of things, but being likable is important. If someone walks in and they're incredibly enthusiastic, then you like them. I've had candidates before that most people, by the way, aren't like this, but I've had candidates that every time I email them respond, thanks for the support. I really appreciate it. And law firms, thank you for thinking of us. We're really, keep them coming and this kind of stuff. But this sort of being liked like that is very important. And we remember the people that like us. The people that like us are the people that will be there for us, so being likable is very important. And law firms and different types of people like different kinds of people. Certain parts of Texas are very conservative. Other parts aren't so much, like Austin. Different legal markets have different cultures. And so if a law firm in that market sees things about your background that match the types of people that are there, they're going to like you. Some law firms may have lots of former athletes. They may even have former professional athletes, and they may have people of similar religions or people that are do things outside of work, or I don't know, softball. But regardless of the culture of the law firm, there may be a law firm culture in other parts of the country that are perfect for you. You have certain types of people that you're friends with. So there are law firms that could be made up of those sorts of people. I saw a law firm not too long ago that was made up of a bunch of literature nerds. I thought it was very interesting. They all like to old books, and I don't know, just these are people, hire people that they like. So what can you find if you're trying to relocate markets that makes it look like, makes you likable to that firm? What about your background makes you likable? It could be politics. It could be, you don't certainly want to believe a religion, but it could be all sorts of things. It could be knowing someone there. It could be calling them up. It could be having something in your background that's unique. And there's just so many things that you could do. Skydiving. There might be, never heard of this, but there could be firms that have a lot of skydivers. There could be Federalist Society. I've seen a lot of times that help people. There could be Grateful Dead people in a lot of firms. There could be, and just the idea is lawyers who have similar backgrounds like each other. So and if a law firm likes you, then they're more likely to hire you than a less qualified attorney, especially if you're relocating. So law firms, if you're relocating, are willing to take a chance on you compared to a similar attorney that they might not like as much. And especially if you're switching markets, your likability is incredibly important, meaning you have to walk in to a firm and you have to connect with people. They have to like you. You have to be up. You have to be able to model being back likable to the people that are interviewing you. They need to like you. And some of the best, the most likable attorneys are just very likable. They're open. They don't judge you when you say things. They smile. They make people around them feel good. They're not defensive. People feel good about them, and you meet them and you like them, and you immediately walk away feeling good about yourself. And there's just people that are like that. And these are skills that, frankly, you can learn. You can take a Dale Carnegie course. You can read a Dale Carnegie book. You can read, I don't know, Tony Robbins, or there's all sorts of ways to become more likable and to learn the skills. And a lot of these are skills, but they're also, you have to be like that, but you have to be likable and the most likable person at the firm interviewing you. And again, one of the things that makes people likable when they're relocating to the market that they grew up in is the firm's more likely to like them because they have connections. They share the interest in things that they may have experienced growing up there, and shared things and hobbies and restaurants and all that kind of thing. So that, again, places and things. Moving markets means you have to be likable. You have to understand to some extent the culture of the firm and the area you're relocating to, the types of people in the firm and what they're like. And you have to have a good understanding of all that, because if you don't, then they're more likely to hire someone that they like. So you need to do whatever you can to look like you're likable. Now, this one's pretty easy. No one's going to hire you if they can't make money off you. And I just mentioned it because a lot of times when people are interviewing with firms, they're thinking to themselves, what can this law firm do for me? What do they think of me? What do they pay? Do I think they're going to hire me? But one of the biggest things is law firms are businesses, and they need to be able to make money. And if a law firm doesn't think it can make money off you, it's not going to hire you. This is what they're doing. They're not interviewing you because they think you're interesting. They're interviewing you because they need to make money. And if a law firm is hiring you from another market, it really needs to be convinced it can make money off you. Either you have client or it can be plugged into the work the firm has, but they need to be able to make money. And when a law firm brings you in, they hope that they can make money. They have a good understanding if they can make money, meaning the work that they have, that they can plug you into. But what's most troublesome for law firms is when they're hiring laterally at the partner level. And this is a whole separate discussion. But a lot of times partners, it's very common, will try to represent that they have a certain amount of business, but they want as high a salary as possible and draw, and they'll do all this. And then the attorney, they need to know that it'll materialize. And there's this cat and mouse game that goes on. And law firms get burned all the time. It's very common because they hire people without substantial business. And this is the big question, especially with partners that they're asking. They need to believe that they can make money off the people that they're hiring, especially partners from other markets. And they're less concerned with associates than they are partners. Associates know that there may be a minimum billable hours and that they need the bar exam, or they have to be able to transfer at least, or something along those lines, or can waive in. But in California, for example, firms, and I think it's actually smart, will typically only hire lateral attorneys from other markets if they have the bar, because it's just too risky with a 30% pass rate and some other stuff. But if you think about it from the law firm's point of view, this makes sense. Why would you want to go through the hassle of hiring someone from another market if they haven't passed the bar in California, when you can just hire someone locally, unless the person's experience is so rare that they need to hire them. And a lot of law firms, if they have enough people in the market, they're not going to hire you unless they can do it, unless there's some compelling other reason. So you need to look like someone they can make money off of. There's other ways too. When you're moving markets, you can say you're the highest billing associate, or you build all these hours, and you love working. And so these are questions that they're asking. And sometimes if you're from a big market where you're billing a lot of hours and you're moving to a smaller market where that's not the norm, if the law firm thinks you're going to bill like an animal, when you get there, they're more likely to hire you probably than if you're not. So they're always asking if they can make money off you. When you're relocating markets, if you start saying things like, I'm looking to not bill a lot of hours, I want more work-life balance, think about it. That's not always the best selling point to try to get a job. So they're always asking if they can make money off you. They're going to ask about what sort of hours you bill. They're going to ask what sort of matters you worked on. If you got put on the most important matters, they're asking all these questions because that's going to show them. And then this is the final one, but think about it from your perspective. People, when they apply to schools, they ask, can I do better based on the ones they get into? People ask this sometimes in relationships with other people. They ask this all the time. They ask this when they're buying things. And law firms are businesses, and they want to make the best decisions possible. So with all the possible issues I've talked about of hiring attorneys from other markets, it should be no surprise that law firms are going to ask themselves if they can do any better when you apply. And doing better means a lot of things. It means everything I've discussed above and in this webinar so far, whether you can be manageable, whether they can hire someone with better experience, can they hire someone they like more, can they hire someone more likely to stick around. But if a law firm believes it can do better than you, they're unlikely to be interested. So if you're at a 2 firm and you're applying to 4 firms in a bigger market, that law firm knows, because they get so many applicants to 4 firms, that they can do better. So they're not going to take a chance. If you're applying from a small market where you may be a rare commodity to a large market where there's lots of people like you, then they're unlikely to bring you on. I remember this is a funny story. I was working with a guy in Kansas, and he was a corporate attorney, had not just doing 10 different types of corporate, which is common in smaller markets. I don't remember where he was, Lawrence or something. I don't remember, but it wasn't one of the biggest. But he thought he was a hotshot. He'd been in the top 10% of his class in a school in Kansas and whatever University of Kansas. He was working at a good firm in Texas. He was, a former athlete, like lots of confidence. And he thought he could very easily pick up and move to a big firm in LA or New York. And when I told him that might be a little bit difficult if he was trying to go to Skadden Arps or something, he got very angry, and we didn't really have any more dealings after that. So if a law firm believes that they can do better than you, which was the case with this guy from Kansas, which there's nothing wrong with being in Kansas, but if you're moving to one of these big markets, they're going to want someone that's more specialized, that maybe went to a better national law school if it's a 4 firm. That's just how it works. So one of the reasons that law firms, that people do very well when you're moving to a smaller market, if you're in a big market, at 4 or 5 firms, because the law firms take a look at you and they're like, we can't do any better. We never get applicants like this. And whoever you are, you're going to look like they're not going to see someone like you again. So they're going to jump at you. Of course they would. You would too. This is how they think. But if you're in a big market like New York City, and you're getting applicants from attorneys all over the country that are great firms in Texas and California and Chicago, and then they're getting so many applicants, they believe they can do better. And if you have very good qualifications and are moving to a market where there's not a lot of people like you, the law firms also believe that they're unlikely to be able to do better. And you can get hired. This is what you need to think about when you're moving markets, is can they do any better? And it's not limited, by the way, to being a 4 or 5 candidate. Being a 1 or 2 candidate in certain practice areas, insurance defense might even be one of them, personal injury, moving to a smaller market with not a lot of people like you, not a lot of experience. There are personal injury firms that specialize and do nothing but motorcycle accidents. There are personal injury firms that do nothing but lemon law. So having experience in different types of practice areas where there's not a lot of people like you means that if you're a 1 or 2 attorney, you can often move markets. You can move to a market where there's hardly any family law attorneys. And there are markets like this all over the country. There are markets that are very small markets. In California, there's all these desert towns and things where there's not a lot of attorneys, and where someone applies, they're very interested. There's markets all over the country where there's a dearth of attorneys. There's these issues with doctors too. There's markets in the country where there's a dearth of attorneys. So sometimes when you're moving to smaller markets, and I told this example earlier, the family law attorney from a smaller town in Colorado, I think it was Boulder. I don't know that it's that small, but I think it might not even be Boulder, it might have been a smaller town. Get a bunch of interviews in a remote county in Wisconsin. Same thing with trust and estates and other attorneys. So if you're in a niche practice area and have excellent skills or a pedigree that is rare in a given market, the firm may not be able to do better. At various points in history, 1999, the first half of 2000, there was such a demand for corporate attorneys that people from 2 or 3 firms were getting interviews with major law firms in Silicon Valley. And there was so much demand, and the law firms couldn't do better, that people were hiring lateral graduates that would typically be a 2 or 3 attorney in the largest firms because they couldn't do any better. So the concept of not being able to do any better is incredibly important. You need to understand, are there a lot of people like me in this market I'm trying to relocate? And if you have rare skills or there's not a lot of people like you, the law firm may not be able to do any better. And if you have a really good background and move into a smaller market, the law firm may not be able to do any better. And if you come across as someone that can be managed and that's likable and looks like you're going to stick around, you're even better off. What I try to tell people when they're applying for any job is that the more markets you choose, the more interviews you're going to get. And so most attorneys, not very rarely, will try to apply to a bunch of markets. Most of them will choose, I would guess, 5 or 6 is the average, or 3 to 5 or something. Most people won't choose a lot of markets. But in reality, the more markets you choose, the more interviews and the jobs you're likely to get. And this is so obvious that I don't know why more attorneys don't do this in their searches. I've worked with thousands, not hundreds, of attorneys that were in a position where they weren't getting as much momentum in their searches as they would like. They weren't good enough, or something was in their background that made it difficult for them to get positions in Los Angeles or other big cities. Not only that, but they may have been in a practice area that was just not in demand in certain markets. The practice area, there was a weird thing that happened in 2008 around 2008, 2009, where corporate attorneys were just losing their jobs in droves in Silicon Valley and New York. But Texas had all this oil and gas work happening, and in the corporate kind of continued humming there. So sometimes the things that happen to the markets are based on problems with the local market. And so looking at other markets can be helpful and can help you get a lot of jobs. And in some cases, other markets just have a lot more openings. And so the people may have not had may have luck in one market and not another. In some cases, people feel like they're being blackballed. In many cases, you're not really being blackballed. What's happening is, and people may feel they're getting blackballed, but really what's happening is you're often not getting interviews and jobs because of the fact that there's just better people that they can hire in that market that may not be unemployed or may not have too many moves. And so regardless of the problem, this can change very dramatically if you start looking at other markets. You need to look at other markets. I'm telling you the obstacles you're against. I hope you've taken notes. If not, I think there's an article that is based on, but this is one of the smartest things you can do if you know how to position yourself correctly to get a job. And this is just a recent example, working with a securities department in Chicago that was in his 60s. He'd been looking for a job for over a year. He was having a lot of difficulty getting hired because he hadn't practiced law in 5 years. His most recent experience, I think I've talked about this guy before, but was starting a diaper company in Russia. I urged him to give up Chicago and look at other markets. When I started working with him, I told him he was too senior. Chicago had a huge pool of securities attorneys. He didn't have any business, hadn't practiced in years. And any of these major markets he was looking at, were going to hire people that were younger, probably currently working, and had a lot of other options besides him. And he ended up finding a position in Seattle with I think as the attorney that had left the firm was going to work for Bill Gates as the personal securities attorney. So they needed an attorney to take his place. Another attorney I worked with years ago was a corporate attorney in Atlanta. She was fired from a large law firm. She looked for months in Atlanta trying to get another job. She was at a 4 firm and looked at 3 firms and every firm she could find. I urged her to search nationally, and she was having a tough time. She started crying in one interview. We kept trying. She got hired with a very good New York firm in Silicon Valley. And had she not done that, none of this would have happened. And now, after working for this law firm for over a decade, she's got an extremely successful law firm in Silicon Valley doing a certain branch of IP law that she's very good at. It's not like hard IP. She doesn't have a technical background. But so there's so many stories I could tell you. The number of stories are just, there's so many. And so you need to understand that if you're able to look in other markets and you understand this ranking systems and the types of firms you're going to be applying to and everything, you can do really well. And many attorneys are limited by searching for positions in one market, many times when they should be looking at several markets. So I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I will answer some questions. I don't have a ton of time again today to answer questions. I think what I may do next week is I will do a webinar, but probably maybe a shorter one, and then take any questions that I may miss today and also some from last week. I do want to take questions about moving markets because I know people probably do have a lot of questions. I'll answer questions. This has been a pretty long webinar, so I'll answer questions for a little while. And then when I come back, I will come back and answer some questions. And then next week we can do more questions. I don't like doing these webinars that are so long, but this is actually a very important topic this week. So I wanted to make sure that I covered it and did the best job I could on this. I put this topic together a couple of weeks ago and did a new presentation about it because I just think it's so important. And I really wish people would spend more time looking at other markets because your career really can change when you do. And this is something people in other professions do a lot of. They will relocate markets and things. And so it's also a very smart thing for attorneys to do. So thank you, and I'll be back in just a minute or so. Okay, so we're going to go to questions. I do want to answer a few questions from last week. So let me just see here. And I apologize for not answering some of these questions last week. So this question from last week was, and again, if you ask questions today, I won't show your name. There's a lot of questions, so I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll get through as many as I can. So this person says, I lost my position in January with a small firm that I had joined after graduation after walking into a very difficult, bad situation. However, using your tips and resume edits, I was able to get multiple interviews, great, and secure offers from each of them and ultimately landed a national firm Well, my prior firm was just 10 to 12 people. Wow. My question is, what advice do you have to ensure success at my next firm? Wow, well, that's great that you were able to get a position, but I'm also very sorry that you lost your position. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so what advice do you have to ensure your success in your next firm? I think that the biggest thing is, let me just see. Okay, so you're currently at the good firm. So what do you do to ensure success? You work the hardest of anyone. You try to be more thorough than you may have been trained, meaning you look at things in a lot of depth. You respect authority, meaning the people that you're working for, which are some of the things that I talked about today. You try to learn your subject matter, what you do, learn stuff in as much depth as possible. You get along with your peers. You appreciate your role and don't take anything for granted. Appreciate what happened to you and don't take anything for granted. You receive, these are things that I recommend, but you go to the office if the office is open. You always be available and reachable. You be enthusiastic, and so there's a lot. The other thing I would just say, and this is important, is success leaves clues. You look at what other people are doing that become partners, that are succeed. So look at how others are getting ahead in the firm, right, and being rewarded and speak to them and learn from them. So what does that mean? What that means is everybody needs teachers. And so I'm a teacher, so it's very good that you're learning from me, because if you weren't learning from me, you would be learning from others, but also having any teachers and mentors and things is very important. So you learn from me and you learn from other people in the firm. You cannot know instinctively and play God and learn all this stuff on your own. I've learned what I know by watching other people and seeing things, but you need to learn from me, but you also need to learn from other people in the firm and what's happening. So you need to watch. The other thing you need to do is ask questions. So you say, and this is a really good question. There's been articles about this question, not written by me, but what can I do in over the next year that would wow you or something if I were able to do it? Something like that. So meaning what in terms of your work performance. The other thing is you can ask this question in interviews. This is just for everyone on the call. What could I do in the first 3 months or 6 months? Do in the first 6 months that would make me incredibly valuable or wow you or something. You get the idea. Valuable or wow you, valuable. Or wow you in my position, something like that. So these are the sorts of questions that you can ask. So sometimes if people see you doing this kind of stuff, especially at a really good firm, they're going to really feel like you're someone that's very valuable, and they're going to be very excited to bring you on and have you. So very few people come and look like they're going to stick around. So those are just some suggestions I have. And I think those can be helpful. Here's another question from last week. And especially when I do these longer webinars, it can be very difficult to get to all these questions. Okay, so I want to thank you for answering my question last summer, whether I should apply for documentary jobs over 50 email. You said no, just work hard applying to jobs. I landed an in-house position with Coca-Cola. Wow. All right, great job. All right, so that's good. Yeah. And one of the things you should do that everyone should do is just not sell yourself short. So a lot of times people will believe that they need to settle, and I think that people don't. I think that you don't have to settle. Again, there's nothing wrong with being a contract attorney, but if you can do better and find a job that you like better, that can be a good thing too. Let's do the next one. Okay, why not consider boutique law firms that address personal interest and share common interest? It could be both either criminal or practice in federal, state, or national code. Yeah, I think smaller boutique firms are great. I would like maybe next week to do a boutique presentation because I love boutiques if I haven't done one yet. But yes, you can always work in boutique firms. There's nothing wrong with working in a boutique firm. As a matter of fact, it can be great. Boutique firms are interesting because a lot of times they'll have expertise in a certain practice area. They'll often have big clients to be brought in when things need to be done efficiently. They can often have very good law practice areas, criminals, an interesting practice area, where there can also be a lot of potential. Yeah, boutiques are great. And talking about boutiques would be a good thing many times, I think, to apply to. Boutiques are very smart places to apply, especially in large markets. They often, a lot of people don't know about them. They're not kind of household names like large firms in big markets are, so they can actually be very good places to apply. Okay, so the next question is, what key factors should attorneys consider when deciding which markets to apply to? That's a good question. I talked about, let me just cut and paste that so it's on the screen. Yeah, that's a very good question. So this particular question, about key factors. Some of the key factors that I think are important to consider are that if it's going to fit your kind of long-term career goals. Most people should have goals like that are long-term in nature. Having goals that are long-term is important. What you need to understand is moving, and I guess I'll just be as direct as possible as I can. So moving from a small size market to a large market will often have less employment security than moving from a large market to a smaller market. So what happens in the large and moving, and then you can do the same logic. Same logic applies to moving from 3 to 4, etc. 4 to 5. So the largest law firms and the most prestigious law firms tend to be very difficult places to keep positions in. The reason they're difficult is because they tend to have up and out. If you're moving to a larger market, there's more people competing for your job, and the firms tend to be run every firm's a business, but they tend to be run more as more efficient businesses that extract as much value as they can out of their attorneys. And then when they think they can get a better attorney and extract more value, then they'll let you go. So it's very difficult to stay in a large law firm for a long period of time, whereas smaller law firms, they tend not to push people out as much. They'll often train you how to get business. There's just a lot of benefits many times with smaller law firms. So that is just something that is important to consider when you're moving firms is, can you move to a smaller firm? And if you move to a smaller firm, you're likely to have more employment security. So that's one factor. The other factor that I think is important is I've seen situations, and it's sad, where an attorney relocates to some sort of smaller market from a larger market, and then buys a house and settles down, and then maybe does a very specific type of work, and then loses their job, and there's no firms in that market. So that also can hurt you quite a bit. And it's something that you should always consider when you're relocating markets as well, whether or not that you're likely to keep your position in that market. And then if you move to a larger market, you need to, the big thing is moving from a smaller market to a larger market, your long-term career path is most likely to be losing your position at the biggest firm at some point, or at the firm you're at, and then going in-house. If you go to a big firm, that's the most likely career path, or moving back to a smaller market, or moving to a smaller firm. If you move to a smaller market, assuming that the firm you're moving to is stable, and it may not be like a 4 or 5 firm or 4 firm, then you're going to have a much better chance of making partner, of having employment stability, and all the sorts of things that are important to a lot of attorneys. Those are some things you should consider in the market you apply to. Okay, this is an interesting question too. These are good questions. Okay, let me see here. I have a ton more time, but I'm going to get to some more. And if you ask a question, I don't get to it, I'll definitely get to it next week. Okay, do you have any recommendations regarding how attorneys can research and evaluate the economic outlook of different markets? No. Yes, I do. Markets that are growing are interesting, because if a law firm's growing and there's a new law firm starts in a growing market, there's certain markets that have been growing like crazy, like Boise, Idaho, or Austin, Texas, or Miami, and different markets. So if a market is growing quite a bit, then it's more likely than not that you may have opportunities that you might not have otherwise, because things are more entrepreneurial, there's more sense of optimism, and law firms are growing and the market's growing. So there are often more opportunities to become a partner and do all these things you may want to do, or to get clients, because there's all this enthusiasm in the market. So growing markets are a very good thing. So there's always going to be surveys out there about which markets are growing the fastest. And there may even be surveys about legal markets. It's not something I do, but there's maybe surveys about legal markets, about which legal markets are growing the fastest, all that sort of thing. The more you can evaluate different markets that are growing, that is very helpful. The other thing, in terms of, we spoke about boutique firms earlier. If you find a firm that is growing and in a market that's growing, that can be helpful too. So a lot of times, every huge law firm at one point was a small law firm, and some law firms grow and others don't. But if you go into a smaller law firm in a growing market with good people, and it seems like it's well run, that could actually be a very good career move and help you quite a bit. So it's a smart thing. Let me see. I'm just reading all these questions. And this is an interesting question. So this question is, how does demand for attorneys vary across different practice areas and markets? Okay, there's a lot of practice areas out there. So I'll talk about some of them, and just to give you some ideas. Litigation, family law, real estate, corporate, some other patent, IP litigation. I mean, there's hundreds of practice areas. I'm just giving you some examples. Commercial and IP litigation, there's a bunch of them. Let's see here. I'll just give you these examples. Commercial litigation is something that typically involves representing companies and things that are having various disputes that are litigation related. Commercial litigation takes place all over. The largest markets expect their commercial litigators to have the best qualifications. Markets need the best qualifications. And smaller markets, not as much. But there's more opportunities in large markets many times than small markets. And the most important litigation matters, meaning tend to go to the largest firms in the largest markets. But there's also boutiques and smaller markets, et cetera. So that's how commercial litigation works in terms of the market. So if you're a commercial litigator and you want to relocate, that's how to think about it. The problem with commercial litigation is that because most stuff is based on local rules, state law, local rules, etc., and most litigation is not federal. What happens is it's much more difficult for commercial litigators to relocate to different states. Difficult. I'm trying to just do this correctly. Much more difficult to relocate to different states than the same state. Family law is similar, each state similar, but there are pockets of areas are all around the country where there's not enough of them. After COVID or during COVID, there was an incredible number of family law openings, and I guess there was more divorce, I don't know. So there was a lot of that. So that became a very popular practice area. So people could relocate from one small market to another, one big market to a smaller market, or a big market to another market. There was tons and tons of opportunities. So family law, it does have a lot of opportunities. Real estate is interesting, can go to areas with a lot of development. There's certain areas of the country where there's just a lot of building and things going on. And so in areas where there's a lot of economic activity and new construction, then there tends to be a lot of real estate opportunities. So that's just something, there's a lot of opportunity. I hope that makes sense about real estate. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities in those sorts of areas. Real estate is also transactional in nature. What's interesting about some of these transactional matters, comparatively, that do those practice areas. And so when there's a lot of economic activity, what happens is all of a sudden, a lot of senior people become marketable. Excuse me. A lot of people that wouldn't otherwise be marketable, and it's much easier for people to move. In corporate, it's the same thing, but it's people in small markets, and also in niche, in small markets become marketable to large markets. If I was a corporate attorney trying to move, I would probably try to look at areas of the country where there was an awful lot of economic activity and that were expanding, and things expand for different reasons. As people got used to working at home and that becomes more popular, there's a lot of options for corporate attorneys to be able to work. And anyway, as people started, there's a lot of opportunities for corporate attorneys, is my point, because there's a lot of markets that have exploded where people move during COVID, and new businesses are starting there and that sort of thing. So there's just a lot of that. Patent is the same thing. Patent is a practice area that's always smart to look at multiple markets. Patent's interesting. You have activity, or you have areas where, like San Diego and Boston and some other places where you have a lot of activity in biotech, and then other areas of the country, which would be like the Bay Area, where there's a lot of activity from double E's and things, and Minnesota. It depends on the market, but patent is interesting depending on your specialty. There's areas that are busy, and then IP litigation tends to be a lot of that happens in California is one place, and there's other areas as well. So a lot of these practice areas, your marketability will depend on the market that you choose. So that's a very good question. Okay, let's see. The next question is, what are the growth prospects for the legal industry in specific markets? The legal industry it grows, and it's just like any industry, it grows in markets where there's already a lot of growth. So when growth starts in one market, for example, if there's a lot of construction and the market's growing very rapidly, real estate will grow. If there's a lot of new businesses being started and business activity, corporate will grow. If the population's growing, you'll have things like family law will grow. If you have markets where there's an aging population, which could be, I don't know, Palm Springs, California, then you're likely to see something like trust and estates grow. So practice areas will often grow depending on the market that they're in and the demand. Obviously, an increasing population may increase the demand for family law and so forth. Are there any specific industries or sectors driving demand in the legal market? I think there's demand in every legal market. It just depends on the practice area. Anywhere there's a dearth of the type of attorneys that the market needs, there's going to be, there may be specific sectors where things are in demand. But it's the same, it's what I said earlier, that if you have population increasing or different things happening and businesses starting, then you're more likely to get activity. It's interesting. There's certain markets. New York is obviously very finance heavy. There's not as much finance and corporate. There's not as much corporate, even though LA is a huge market. There's really not as much corporate in LA as there are in a lot of other markets. It's more of a mid-market, but there's a lot of litigation in LA. There's just, every market is a little bit different, and your things are thriving in one market versus the other. People, when they think of LA, always think, oh, there must be a lot of entertainment jobs. That's just not the case. So it depends really on your practice area and the location that you're in. One way to figure out what's in demand is just to go to the BCG website and see the jobs that are on there. And that can often, if you were to go in and count them based on each practice area, that would show you and then break them down by location. But typically, you're going to have the most jobs in the largest markets. Washington, D.C., you're going to have a lot more litigation type jobs than you're going to have in New York by percentage. When you start getting into the smaller markets, you're going to have more consumer facing things like family law and things than you're going to have in larger markets. So typically, as you move down the market size, the more the jobs get more consumer facing, corporate facing, and the most company facing and the highest rates are always probably going to be in the largest markets. Let's take a few more questions. These are great questions. I appreciate everyone asking them. Let me see here. Okay, how do local networking and professional organizations contribute to career advancement in this market? I think, that one of the best ways of getting a job is if you have a relationship or someone in the firm recommends you or something along those lines. And so that can be very helpful in terms of getting positions. So local networking positions are very important. Professional organizations are very important. They're also important. They're important from the standpoint of meeting people and forming relationships and having friendly dialogue with people. But one of the ways that I think that they're actually the most important is the kind of knowledge that you pick up from them. Just as a recruiter has knowledge about different things, a good recruiter, so too will you learn about things through the grapevine with professional organizations, because you'll talk to people, you'll hear things, and you'll hear about firms you didn't know about, or you'll hear about people that are really busy, and they'll even say, I've been to professional organization meetings, will say, if you know anybody that does this, let me know. And so you'll get that kind of information. It's also good to be part of professional associations when you're applying to jobs, because that shows, if you have that on your resume and it's actually a real professional organization, it shows that you have a lot of interest in whatever the practice area and so forth is, and in that local market. And that's good. Attorneys get business all the time based on being part of organizations that often have nothing to do with practicing law. They go on the boards of hospitals and nonprofits and all sorts of things. So local networking organizations would be very helpful to be part of. And I think that's a great question. Certainly anything you can do as an attorney to be part of them and to meet people and to be liked, because when you apply to those firms, if people already know who you are, that can be incredibly helpful. Let me see here. Okay, this is a good question too. Thank you for all these questions. Let me see here. So the question is, what are the available opportunities for career growth and advancement in a small market? So it's an interesting question. So anytime you go into a smaller market, the money's going to be less. Always, almost always. There's going to be less work most of the time. The hours are going to be less. The opportunities to make partner and so forth will be greater. The importance of relationships with your peers, relationships, and these are great questions, with your peers, more important. And then things like ability to get business, often easier. Ability to become a partner, easier to much easier. And I've often told this story that when I was clerking, I clerked in not that small of a town, but I don't know how big it was, but 20, 30, I don't remember, but 1,000 people. But the point is that when I started clerking, I saw all of these attorneys that were working in local firms, not a lot of them, but like 3 to 4 that would come to the court. And then I would see them. There wasn't a lot of place to go out. So I would see them and talk to them when I went out. And then I didn't have any contact with them after leaving the clerkship. And then I looked them up years later, and they were all the same firms and partners. And one of them was leading the firm. So I thought that was very interesting, because all the people that I know, when I started practicing law at big firms in Los Angeles, with only a few exceptions, are not at those firms anymore. So if you think about, that's very interesting. It means that often there's more stability in smaller markets for people than there might be in larger markets. I think that the attorneys tend to stick together more and have each other's back more than they might in a larger market. And I think the reason is because they have to. What else are the attorneys going to do? If they can't find another job, what else are they supposed to do? Okay, this is a good point. So this question, and then I'll do one more, and then anybody whose questions I didn't answer, I'll get to them next week. How does the size of the market influence the type of clients and cases I'm likely to encounter? If you're an associate, larger markets mean for large firms. Means you will be working on large matters that require a huge amount of detail. Smaller markets mean most often smaller clients that do not have as much money to spend. And require less detail. That's how that works. Now, it's not always the case, because there's exceptional firms in small markets and attorneys that went to the best law schools and worked at the best firms and all. But that's a generality. So if you work in a smaller market, you're much more likely to work for smaller clients. If you work in a larger market, you're much more likely, almost certain, to work for larger, and this is larger markets for large firms. There's obviously firms in larger markets that work for small firms. So it just kind of depends. But this is what happens with larger and smaller markets, and a good way to understand it. Okay, let me see. This is last question. Okay, so this is a good one. And there's a bunch more questions. Let me just see if there's any other I should really do. Give me a second. Okay, I'll just skip this one because I do have to get on a Zoom conference. I really have to be on it. So how does the work-life balance and overall lifestyle considerations differ between small and big markets? Almost always, you will have a much better lifestyle, and lower cost of living in smaller markets, and probably lower taxes. That's how that works. You will, most of the time, working in a smaller market is going to provide you with a lot of lifestyle advantages. Personally, the other thing about the smaller market is your salary is going to be much lower. If you take a market like New York City and then a smaller market, I don't know, Syracuse or Albany, for an example, you can buy a house, and a nice house in those markets for a few $100,000, maybe a little bit more. Whereas if you wanted to do something similar in New York, or New York City, you're going to spend a lot more money. So same thing as in a market like Los Angeles versus someplace smaller, Palm Springs. I've talked about them earlier. So that's how, actually Palm Springs is probably pretty expensive because that's a return, but you get the idea. Smaller markets tend to have more advantages in terms of your lifestyle and stuff than your larger markets. I certainly appreciate everyone being on this today. You could see last week, I also didn't get to all the questions, so I will do the rest of the questions next week. I think next week I'll either talk about boutique firms or I just might do a random Q&A. But I certainly appreciate everyone being in this webinar. I know it was long, so it's a lot to cover, but this stuff is very helpful. I'll tell you that I personally watch webinars like this for people at least an hour a day. The stuff I watch isn't, of course, related all to the legal industry, but I watch recordings and things of people that are talking about things that I think are important. And I think it's very smart that you're doing this as well. But I appreciate everyone being on this. And I'm sorry I do have to go a little early, but this has already been a really long webinar. So thank you, and I'll talk to you next week.